Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Everything Educator Related. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you checked out my previous videos on FTC Competency 1.1 and 1.2. I have been doing this series where I have been going over the competencies for the FTCE ESE exam. If you like that I'm doing this series, please go ahead and subscribe and comment if you wish. I really appreciate comments and likes just to keep me going. So in this video, we're going to do the FTCE ESE Competency 1.3. And if it's your first time, you know, coming across my videos, please go ahead and check out the rest of the videos on my channels because I also have other videos related to the FTCE ESE exam, right? Especially the one where I give a lot of tips as it relates to taking the exam in person and how to prepare and stuff like that. So, to continue with my video now, today we're going to look at competency 1.3 as I said before. So, in this competency, you are comparing typical and atypical development of physical, cognitive, linguistic, social, and emotional stages of students in the K to 12 educational system, right? So if you're looking at students with disabilities, you want to be able to identify them. So what's the typical behavior? What's the atypical behavior? How can you identify a student who has a disability, right? So that's why we need to know the atypical and typical development within a child, right? So let's get into the physical development. So typical development in a child, right? Physically. You might see the child growing in height and weight. They have improved coordination, strength, and stamina, right? So they achieve their milestones, such as, they go from crawling to walking to running to jumping, right? So that's the normal, typical development of a child. So let's look at the atypical development. The atypical development is what you do not expect, right? Like, it prevents this child from hitting those milestones, right? So you might see delays or impairments in their gross or fine motor skills, right? So that means they're writing their fingers or they're using their fingers. That's what they mean by fine motor. Gross motor is basically like using your legs and your hands and stuff like that. So you're gonna look to see if there is any delays or impairments in those areas physically, which does result in um, difficulty with their balance, their coordination, their fine motor skills, right? Writing and stuff like that. So this may be associated with a physical disability or health condition, right? So, what are some examples? So, in the infancy stage, like children that just have been born to maybe like 2 years old, right? You might see them excessively crying. They might have difficulty sleeping, irregular sleep patterns. They might have feeding difficulties, separation anxiety, difficulty self-soothing, and delayed milestones such as, the crawling, the walking, So that's what you can look for as it relates to during those ages. In the early childhood age, 2 years old to 6 year old, do they have temper tantrums or do they have aggressive behaviors? Do they have defiance or difficulty sharing, resistance to routines, attention seeking behaviors? In middle childhood, 6 to 12 years old, are they school refusal or avoidance, peer conflicts or bullying behavior, oppositional behavior towards authority figures, lying, stealing, low frustration tolerance, academic difficulties or underachievement? During adolescence, are they that is from 12 to 18 years old? Do they have risk-taking behaviors, peer pressure influence, mood swings, defiance of rules or authority? So those are all little signs for atypical development that really you can really look into and be like, does this child, is this a special needs child? Do they need special needs, right? So those are just some atypical development to look for in those ages, right? So let's look at cognitive development. Cognitive development has to do with thinking, right? Your brain, how do you cognitively function, right? So in children of typical development, they are remembering things. They have increasing abilities in memory, attention, problem solving skills, abstract thinking skills, right? And they acquire language skills. They develop literacy skills, numeracy skills, and they demonstrate curiosity. However, when it comes down to atypical development in cognitively, you find that there are some delays or some impairments in their cognitive functioning, right? So they may have difficulty with um, remembering things, they may have difficulty with attention, executive function, or even understanding certain concepts, right? So this really can manifest into like learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, or neurodevelopmental disorders like autism. And if you want to know more about these disabilities, you have to tune into my previous video, chapter where I talked about competency 1.2 and the different types of disabilities under each of those categories, right? So that's cognitive development. So remember, cognitive development refers to the growth and maturation of cognitive abilities, including thinking, learning, problem solving, and understanding, right? So Jean Piaget came up with these main stages of typical development, right? So the first stage is the sensory-motor stage, which is from birth to 2 years old, right? At this stage, infants learn about their world through their senses, right, and their actions. So the key development milestones include object permanence, meaning understanding that the object is there still even when it's not in sight. The development of basic motor skills and simple problem solving abilities. So from birth to 2 year old should be able to um, develop these skills, right? So that's the sensory motor stage. Has to do a lot with their senses and their actions, right? So in the pre-operational stage, which is from 2 years old to 7 years old, this is the stage where children develop language and symbolic thinking, right? So they may struggle with logical thinking, but they should understand that language and symbolic thinking, right? So that's when they start to kind of imagine stuff like, when you go outside and you imagine that if you're your doll is talking and stuff like that, like playhouse and all of those stuff. This is the stage for that, right? So children develop language, symbolic thinking, um, and they pretend play. Yes, in other words, it's called pretend play, dollhouse, and stuff like that. And they begin to use symbols, words, and images to represent objects, right? And they demonstrate egocentrism, right? Which is normal, where children have difficulty understanding other perspectives. So you might just see them go in front of the TV while you're watching it, but they don't understand that you cannot see through them, right? They only care about, you know, they just want to know that they're seeing, but they're not really seeing from your perspective, right? I'm blocking mom or I'm blocking dad. So it's that's normal. And they exhibit animalistic thinking, including human-like qualities to an inanimate objects. So for example, acting as if their doll is, when they're playing with their dolls and stuff like that. So that's normal. That's a part of the pre-operational stage. Next, you have the concrete operational stage, which is from age 7 to 11. So the children become more proficient in their logical thinking now. So they have reason, their reasoning is concrete and based on tangible experiences. So they develop the ability to perform operations on concrete objects and understand conservation. Conservation is that the quantity remains the same despite changes in shape or arrangement. So if you have, for example, three coins, just because you shape it different doesn't mean that it's not the same three coins. They understand that aspect, right? Children demonstrate improved understanding of concepts such as classification, arranging objects in series, cause and effect relationships, right? So at this stage, you're supposed to be thinking more logically now, right? And lastly, you have the formal operational stage, which is from 11 years and older. So in this stage, adolescents they develop abstract thinking, right? And they can reason logically about hypothetical situations. So they engage in deductive reasoning, problem solving, and critical thinking. The adolescents begin to think about possibilities, consider multiple perspectives, and they develop metacognitive skills such as reflection and self awareness, allowing them to monitor and regulate their own thinking process. So, this is the regular stages of development, right? So, this is how you would be able to identify the atypical development, which I will go into right now. So, remember, at the sensory motor stage, which is from birth to two, children are able to use their senses, right? So children develop basic sensory-motor skills such as grasping objects, reaching and exploring their environment through their senses. However, atypical development looks like delays or impairments in the sensory-motor development. So this involves difficulty with their motor coordination, sensory processing, or adaptive skills. Their language development. Children acquire language skills beginning with cooing and babbling, then forming single words, and eventually it goes to complex sentences. When there is an atypical development, there is a language delay, and it may result in difficulty with them producing speech, difficulty in them um, understanding or having comprehension, and difficulty with them having expressive language. So children may struggle with articulation, vocabulary, or grammar. Symbolic thinking. As we mentioned, this involves where children use symbols such as words and images to represent objects, actions, and concepts. In other words, pretend play, right? That stage. So, atypical development may involve challenges with symbolic thinking, so leading to difficulties in understanding abstract concepts, metaphors, or analogies. Children may struggle with lit- um, literal interpretation or concrete thinking. How about problem solving skills? Children develop problem solving abilities through, exploring, trial and error, and just experience overall. They learn to analyze situations and come up with solutions. Atypical development looks like deficits in problem solving, making it challenging for children to navigate tasks, right? So they may exhibit rigidly in thinking or difficulty generating solutions. How about executive functioning? This involves planning, organizing, the working memory, self-regulation, and we see this more in the adolescents, right? So atypical development may involve deficits in executive functioning, leading to difficulties in planning, organizing, carrying out tasks, right? And academic achievement. Typical cognitive development supports academic achievement. So, across various domains, including literacy, numeracy, and problem solving, children demonstrate age appropriate skills. However, in atypical cognitive development, this may be affected, so leading to learning difficulties or disabilities. Children may require specialized instruction, so that's where special education comes in, right? Next is emotional development, and we have two other development left after this. So our emotional development is how are we regulating our emotions, right? So in typical development of a child, children learn to express themselves, right? Regulate their emotions and behaviors and cope with stress, right? Including having a good self-esteem and resilience. Atypical development looks like difficulties in regulating emotions. Are you angry all the time? Are you coping with stress or managing behaviors? So this can also manifest in mood swings, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, depression, or behavioral um, disorders. So that's the atypical development side of stuff. And so typically children can, express happiness, sadness, anger, and they can regulate them appropriately, right? But atypical development looks like it's your emotions is intense, you can't regulate it. It's just, outburst, mood swing, right? Let's look at empathy and social understanding. So in typical development, a child may develop empathy, right? And they regard others' feelings. In an atypical development, they may have difficulty recognizing or understand other people's emotions. So this is like a lack of empathy or social insight that may lead to, challenges in them forming relationships with others. Let's look more into regulating those emotions. So children learn strategies for regulating, whether it's, take a deep breath and they actually calm down. But when it comes down to atypical, they have poor emotional regulation, which may lead to difficulties in managing or coping with stress, right? You have social engagement. Are they actively socially interacting with others, right? With their peers. Atypical looks like withdrawal, it looks like isolation. So the children may have limited interest in social activities that may refer to be alone, right? Let's look at behavioral manifestations. In typical emotional development, it's characterized by age appropriate behaviors and responses to emotional stimuli. Atypical basically means aggression, defiance, withdrawal, and children may engage in disruptive or harmful behaviors. All right, we're almost there. Now we're going to look at linguistic development. So that means language development, right? Being able to acquire language, use language, right? So typical development means the children progress through the stages of language acquisition, which includes, for example, from cooing to babbling to single words to saying two-word phrases and eventually their complex sentences, right? However, atypical development looks like having delays or disorders in language acquisition and communication. So this may be like speech delays, language disorders, articulation, stuttering, or just language processing difficulties, right? So, in order for you to understand this, these are the stages of typical development, right? You got the pre-linguistic stage, which is from birth to 12 months or 1 year old. During this stage, infants communicate through crying, through cooing and babbling. Infants produce a variety of sound and engages in vocal play, right? From 6 months old to 1 year old, right, is the babbling stage. Babbling means that baba, dada, like those are babblings. Like the infants explore their sounds, and from 1 year old to 18 months, or 12 months to 18 months, it's the one word, right? Or holophrastic, holophrastic or phrastic stage where children begin to use single words to communicate. So they typically use gestures like pointing and vocabulary that consists of familiar objects or actions in their environment. right? So they use that one word, single word phrase to communicate. So, for example, maybe, let me see if I can think of one. Milk, or, something like that. A word that they know. Baba for bottle, or, one word that they know. Then you have from 18 months to 24 months is the two-word stage. So they will use two words, right? So they start combining words to form short phrases. So their speech may be like big dog or more milk. So they start using those two words. Then you have the early multi-word stage, which is from 2 year old to 3 year old, which their vocabulary expands. So they produce longer and complex sentences, and they acquire grammatical structures and rules of syntax such as plurals, verb tense, word order, etc. Then from 3 to 5 year old, you have the later multi-word stage, where children continue to refine their language skills and demonstrate greater proficiency in grammar, vocabulary, and syntax. Syntax means sentence structure. And then you have school age to adolescence years, which is linguistic development continues through childhood and adolescence with increasing proficiency in reading, writing, all the 9 years of vocabulary and stuff. So this is what the typical development um, will look like. So anything other than that is atypical development. Next, you have the last one, social development. So, social development, how are you socializing with others or other peers? Or in a typical social development, children develop relationships with both peers and adults. They demonstrate empathy, cooperation, perspective, um, seeing others' perspective, sharing, taking turns, resolving conflicts, and just understanding social norms, right? But in an atypical development, they may have difficulty in forming and maintaining relationships, right? They don't understand certain cues, social cues. They don't interpret facial expressions and body language or regulate their emotions, right? So a popular one that you would see atypical is like, for example, students with autism or children with autism, they may have like that, um, type of social or communication um, challenges, right? So let's get into what typical social development looks like. So from birth to 2 years old, during infancy, um, social development begins with attachment to primary caregivers, typically parents or caregivers. So basically, infants learn to communicate their needs, right? Through either crying, showing facial expressions, and body language. And they engage in social interactions such as eye contact, smiling, and responding to familiar faces. In toddlerhood, which is 2 to 3 years old, um, toddlers start to explore their independence, right? And they engage in parallel play, meaning to play alongside other children, but they may not interact directly with them, but they play alongside them. Toddlers begin to imitate adult behavior um, by learning social norms and expectations through observation and modeling of that adults, right? The early childhood stage, which is from 3 to 6 years old, social interaction become more complex as children develop their friendships, right, and engage in cooperative play. So they learn to share, take turns, they negotiate conflict with peers. Children develop empathy and begin to understand other people's feelings and other people's perspectives, right? In middle childhood, which is from 6 to 12 years, social relationships become even more important as children spend time with interacting with peers. They form close friendships based on shared interests, and they develop social competence, including communication skills, problem solving abilities, and conflict resolution strategies, and they begin to understand social roles and identities. In adolescence, which is 12 to 18, social development is characterized by search for who they are, their identity and their independence, right? So they form more intimate and complex relationship with peers. They explore romantic interests and, developing a sense of belonging, right? And they become increasingly aware of societal norms and values. So these atypical, sorry, these are just the typical development, social development, and anything otherwise from this is a atypical development. So I just wanted you to be introduced to the different type of um, the difference between the typical and atypical development, which makes it easier for a child with disability to be identified, whether it's cognitively, emotionally, linguistically, socially, and so forth. So it's important for you to be able to know these differences, right? Please hit that subscription button. Please hit that like button. Comment, share with a friend or somebody who's about to take the FTCE exam. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.